His name was Thomas Reed, and nobody at the civilian range that morning knew he'd spent 28 years in the Marine Corps. Nobody knew about the 3 tours he'd done as a scout sniper in Vietnam, or the 2 more in the Gulf. Nobody knew that the rifle he carried, scratched and worn as it was, had been with him through jungles and deserts, through missions that never made it into any official record. He'd retired to a small town in Montana, living on his pension, keeping to himself. His wife had passed 2 years ago. His kids had moved to the coasts. The truck they were betting on was the only thing of value he owned, but it wasn't the truck that mattered to Thomas. It was the principle. He'd watched these young Marines for weeks, coming to the range with their expensive gear, their confidence bordering on arrogance, treating the older shooters with barely concealed contempt. He'd stayed quiet, as he always did, but today something had shifted. The range officer, a former Army sergeant named Mitchell, tried to intervene. "Gentlemen, I don't think this is appropriate. This isn't a competition range." The tallest of the young Marines, a corporal named Vance, with a fresh, high and tight haircut, waved him off. "It's fine, Sarge. Just a friendly bet between Marines. Unless the old-timer wants to back out." Thomas finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "What's the course of fire?" Vance grinned. "Standard qualification. 50 rounds. 200, 300, and 500 yards. Iron sights for you, since that's all you got. We'll use our optics. Highest combined score wins." The other 2 Marines, both lance corporals, were already setting up their rifles on the benches, checking their gear. Their weapons were pristine, custom-built precision instruments with adjustable stocks, match-grade barrels, and optics that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Thomas's M14 looked like something pulled from a forgotten armory, its wooden stock dark with age and oil, the metal worn smooth from decades of handling. Mitchell stepped closer to Thomas, lowering his voice. "Sir, you don't have to do this. These kids don't know any better, but you shouldn't risk your vehicle over their egos." Thomas looked at him with those sad, serious eyes. "I know what I'm doing, son." There was something in his tone that made Mitchell step back, a quiet authority that couldn't be faked. The range went silent as other shooters stopped to watch. Word had spread quickly. An old man with iron sights against 3 young Marines with state-of-the-art equipment. Some of the watchers were already pulling out their phones. Thomas moved to the 200-yard line first, settling into position with a slowness that made Vance smirk. But those who knew shooting saw something else. They saw a man whose body remembered every movement, whose breathing fell into a rhythm as natural as a heartbeat, whose hands found their positions without thought. The rifle came up, and for a moment, Thomas wasn't 70 years old anymore. He wasn't standing in Montana. He was back in the jungle, back in the sand, back in all those places where hesitation meant death and precision meant survival. The first shot cracked across the range, then another, and another. Thomas fired with a steady rhythm, no rushing, no adjustment between rounds. Just breathing, trigger press, follow through. Breathing, trigger press, follow through. When he finished his string at 200 yards, he stood and stepped back without looking at his target. Vance went next, taking his time, using his expensive optic to dial in each shot. His shooting was technically sound, careful, by the book. The other 2 Marines followed, their confidence visible in every movement. When all 4 had completed the 200-yard stage, Mitchell walked downrange to score the targets. He was gone for several minutes. When he came back, his face was carefully neutral, but his hands shook slightly as he wrote down the scores. Corporal Vance, 47 out of 50. Lance Corporal Martinez, 48. Lance Corporal Chen, 46. He paused, looking at Thomas. Shooter Reed, 50 out of 50. Perfect score. The silence that followed was absolute. Vance's smirk disappeared. "That's impossible. Nobody shoots perfect with iron sights at 200 yards without warm-up rounds." Thomas said nothing, just walked to the 300-yard line and took his position. The sad expression never left his face, but there was something else there now, something the young Marines were beginning to recognize. At 300 yards, the wind picked up slightly, pushing across the range from left to right. Thomas waited, feeling it, reading it the way he'd learned to read wind in places where the stakes were infinitely higher than a truck. He made a tiny adjustment to his sight, barely visible, then began firing. Same rhythm, same steady breathing, Same absolute focus. The young Marines shot after him, taking longer now, less certain. Their expensive optics gave them clear pictures of the targets, but they lacked something Thomas had earned through decades and thousands of rounds. They had equipment. He had experience burned into muscle memory and instinct. Mitchell scored the targets again. His voice was quieter this time. Corporal Vance, 44. Lance Corporal Martinez, 45. Lance Corporal Chen, 43. Another pause. Shooter Reed, 49 out of 50. One shot, just barely outside the scoring ring, caught by a gust of wind. Thomas nodded slightly, accepting it. The other shooters around the range had gone completely quiet. Some of them were starting to understand. They were watching something rare. The 500-yard line was where the real test began. At that distance, iron sights became a serious challenge even for experienced shooters. The target looked small, the front sight post covering it almost completely. It required not just skill but a kind of faith, a trust in fundamentals that most modern shooters never developed because they never had to. The young Marines were visibly nervous now. They'd gone from cocky to uncertain, and uncertainty was poison to precision shooting. Thomas took his position for the final time. His body ached. His eyes weren't what they'd been 40 years ago. His hands had a slight tremor from age that no amount of will could completely eliminate. But when he settled behind that rifle, when his cheek touched the stock and his finger found the trigger, all of that fell away. He was doing what he'd done 10,000 times before, in places and circumstances these young men couldn't imagine. The rifle spoke, and downrange, bullets found their marks. Not perfect this time. Age and distance and the limitations of iron sights took their toll, but close, very close. When the young Marines shot, their nervousness showed. Vance rushed a shot. Martinez overcorrected for wind. Chen's breathing was off, his rhythm broken by tension. Mitchell walked downrange one final time. The crowd of shooters had grown, word having spread through the entire facility. When he returned, he didn't bother with drama. He just read the scores. Corporal Vance final total, 134 out of 150. Lance Corporal Martinez, 136. Lance Corporal Chen, 131. He looked at Thomas, Shooter Reed, 147 out of 150. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Vance did something unexpected. He stood at attention and saluted. "Sir, I apologize. That was disrespectful from the start. I don't know who you are, but you've clearly earned more respect than we showed you." Thomas slowly returned the salute, then lowered his hand. "I'm nobody special, Corporal. Just a Marine who learned to shoot a long time ago." But Mitchell had pulled out his phone during the final string, curiosity getting the better of him. A quick search of the name, Thomas Reed, Marine Corps, sniper. His face went pale as the results came up. He turned the phone toward Vance, who read for a moment, then looked up at Thomas with an expression of pure shock. "Sir, you're Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Reed. You're in the Scout Sniper Hall of Fame. You have the third highest confirmed kill count in Marine Corps history. You trained half the sniper instructors currently in the Corps. You wrote 2 chapters of the current marksmanship manual. Sir, I'm so sorry. We had no idea." Thomas picked up his truck keys from the bench. "You weren't supposed to have an idea. That's not why I shoot, and it's not why I accepted your bet." He looked at each of the 3 young Marines in turn. "You've got good equipment, better than I ever had. But equipment doesn't make a shooter. Time does. Practice does. Humility does. You can have all the optics in the world, but if you don't respect the fundamentals, if you don't respect the rifle, if you don't respect the other shooters around you, you'll never be more than mediocre." Vance straightened. "Sir, we'll carry your ammo. For a year, like we said. And if you're willing, we'd be honored if you'd teach us. Really teach us." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his sad eyes studying the 3 young men. Then something softened in his expression. "I'll do better than that. I'll teach you for free. Every weekend you're available. But first, you're going to strip those fancy optics off your rifles and learn to shoot with iron sights. You're going to learn the way I learned, the way every Marine used to learn. Because someday your battery might die, your optic might break, your equipment might fail. And when that happens, you need to know you can still make the shot. You need to know that the weapon isn't what makes you deadly, you are." The three Marines nodded, and there was genuine respect in their faces now, the kind that can't be faked or forced. Mitchell approached Thomas as the crowd began to disperse. "Sir, I served with a Marine who trained under you at Quantico. He always said you were the best he'd ever seen, said you could read wind like you could see it. I'm sorry I didn't recognize your name." Thomas shook his hand. "Don't be. I prefer it that way. I didn't do what I did for recognition. I did it because it needed doing." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at the young Marines, who were already examining their rifles, discussing iron sights and fundamentals. "One more thing, Corporal. The truck bet. That was never about the truck. It was about teaching you that respect isn't given based on age or appearance or equipment. It's earned through action. You three just learned that lesson. Don't forget it." As Thomas drove away in his worn red pickup, the morning sun glinting off its faded paint, the range behind him had changed. The young Marines were already planning their next session, this time with humility. The other shooters were talking about what they'd witnessed, about fundamentals and respect, and the difference between equipment and skill. And somewhere in the mountains of Montana, an old man with a sad face and a red jacket smiled slightly, knowing that maybe, just maybe, he'd passed on something that mattered more than any score on any target. He'd passed on respect for the craft, for the fundamentals, for the generations of shooters who came before. Because that's what Marines do. They pass it on.